The seat that shook the sky. At 35,000 feet above the heartland of America, a flight bound from Los Angeles to New York carved its steady path through the clouds. The plane was full, the hum of quiet conversations and the faint clink of glasses in first class, giving it the air of typical luxury. The cabin lights glowed a warm gold as service carts rolled gently over the plush carpet. Yet, within this high-altitude stillness, something darker brewed tension, injustice, and the first ripple of a storm that would rattle not just a cabin, but an entire nation. Lena Carter sat in seat 2A, poised and composed. Her tailored navy blue suit hugged her frame with crisp elegance, the hem sharp against her knees, the cuffs glinting slightly from a sleek gold watch resting on her wrist. Her rich brown skin glowed subtly under the overhead lights, and her short, coiled hair framed a face that had long learned to meet the world with unwavering calm. She was reading, a tablet resting on the tray in front of her, the only noise around her the soft whoosh of recycled air and the distant chatter of cabin crew. Lena was 42, a professional, polished, respected, but more importantly, she was intentional. Her presence here wasn't a fluke. She had paid for this seat, earned it, flown countless miles with this airline and others. Yet, none of that mattered to the woman approaching down the aisle with a clipboard and a sneer. Karen Pierce, flight attendant, white, sharp-chinned, blonde hair pulled into a tight twist, moved through the first-class cabin like she owned it. Her navy uniform was immaculate, the kind you could starch in a glass. Her steps clipped as she neared Lena's row, the expression on her face already coiling with suspicion. Not once did she glance at the other passengers. Her eyes were fixed only on Lena. Without so much as a smile, she halted beside seat 2A. "Ma'am," Karen began, voice icy, "I need to see your boarding pass." Lena looked up, blinked once, slowly, then reached calmly into the inside pocket of her blazer and produced the pass. "Of course," she said, her tone respectful but cool. Karen snatched it and frowned. Her eyes flicked down to the information. Seat 2A, first class, Lena Carter. Her jaw tightened. Everything checked out, but somehow she didn't believe it. "This says first class," Karen said, her voice raised just enough for other passengers to hear. Her eyebrows lifted, her mouth pulled tight into something just shy of a smirk. "But are you sure you're in the right seat?" Lena's gaze didn't flinch. "Yes," she said plainly. Karen hesitated, as if unsure whether to accept that. A beat passed. Another. "I'll check with the crew," she finally muttered, handing back the boarding pass with a touch of irritation, and stalked away. The moment should have ended there. But Karen wasn't done. 5 minutes later, she returned, this time with 2 uniformed male crew members. They were large, their expressions unreadable. Karen stood slightly behind them, her hands crossed over her clipboard. "I'm sorry," one of the men said. "There's been a security concern. We're going to have to ask you to move to coach while we sort this out." Lena didn't rise. She tilted her head. "A security concern? Regarding me?" Karen stepped forward. "We have reason to believe this passenger is occupying this seat fraudulently." Gasps murmured through the cabin. The coffee cart beside them shook. One passenger clinked their glass too hard. Someone else whispered, "Is this really happening?" Lena calmly reached down and picked up her tablet. She stood slowly, deliberately. "If there's confusion, I'll comply," she said, her voice like the smooth edge of polished steel. "But know that this will be addressed." She gathered her things, heels clicking on the floor as she was led down the aisle. A little girl, no older than 7, turned her head and whispered, "Mommy, why are they making her move?" The mother pulled her close. As Lena moved into coach, the man in seat 15, middle, aged, red-faced from alcohol, his t-shirt stretched tight over his belly, snorted loudly and said, "Look at that. Got caught. Should have known she didn't belong up front." Lena didn't respond, but she made a mental note of him, and Karen, and the 2 crew members whose names she caught on their tags, Tom and Shane. She found a middle seat between a crying baby and a man who refused to put his phone in airplane mode. That's what happened. Karen, still standing in first class, moved past the aisle again with a tray of coffee. She made a sudden turn to speak to another passenger, and somehow her elbow caught the tray. A full cup of hot coffee flew through the air and landed squarely on a child in 2C. The scream was instant. Shrieking, high-pitched. The cabin froze. The child's mother jumped to her feet. People stood. Karen gasped. But her next words sealed her fate. It wasn't my fault. That woman distracted me. All eyes turned to Lena. The woman in seat 2C shouted, "What woman? She's not even up here." Karen froze, and Lena, from her coach seat, turned her head slightly and looked straight down the aisle. Her stare locked on Karen. Silent. Deadly. Knowing. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. One message. One recipient. And the war began. It was footage from her phone. Captured the moment Karen confronted her in first class. The moment the boarding pass was handed over. The tone in Karen's voice. The way she looked Lena up and down, not as a passenger, but as a problem. And more importantly, the timestamp. It began to spread. The file went to Marcus Dade, a civil rights attorney seated in row 3B, who had watched the entire first class exchange quietly. He was on this flight for a reason, headed to New York for a panel on systemic bias. Now, he had living evidence unfolding in real time. He uploaded it. Within 15 minutes, the footage had been viewed over 10,000 times. By the time the plane touched down, it had reached 100,000. And then it exploded. Marcus stood up in his row. "Flight crew," he shouted. "This is on record. This is racial profiling. This is misconduct. And I've documented all of it." Karen's face went pale. Someone else chimed in. "We all saw what happened." Another yelled, "She didn't do anything wrong." Karen's voice cracked. "This is a matter for security, not the public." But it was too late. The moment the cabin doors opened at JFK, uniformed TSA agents were already waiting, not for Lena, but for statement from the flight crew. They weren't alone. Dozens of journalists had appeared near the terminal gates. Somehow the story had reached the ground before the plane had. Lena didn't say a word as she stepped off the aircraft. She simply walked. Head high. Suit perfect. Dignity intact. And then someone whispered, "Do you know who she is?" A woman in sunglasses whispered it to her partner. He pulled out his phone. Lena Carter. Founder. CEO. Private stakeholder in Equinox Airways, the parent company of the very airline she had just been removed from first class on. She wasn't just a woman in seat 2A. She owned the seat, owned the fleet, owned the airline. The whispers turned to gasps, then turned to fire. By the time Karen Pierce stepped off the plane, the entire front terminal knew what had happened, and the cameras were waiting. MS. Pierce, did you remove MS. Carter from her seat because of her race? MS. Pierce, do you understand who you just humiliated? MS. Pierce, would you like to apologize? Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Behind her, Lena stood at a podium, pulled hastily from a nearby gate. She faced the cameras, the microphones, and said nothing for a long moment. The press leaned in. Phones lifted. The terminal waited. Then she spoke. "My name is Lena Carter. I built this airline from the ground up with my own hands. Today, I was humiliated on one of my own aircraft. I was removed from a seat I paid for, accused of lying, shamed in public, and had coffee spilled on a child as collateral damage for someone's bias." Flashbulbs erupted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling. It was systemic. It was deliberate. And it ends today. More flashes. Audible gasps. "I will not press criminal charges," she continued, "but I will launch a full investigation into the practices and personnel of Equinox Airways. And I will ensure no Onino one ever experiences what I just did. Because injustice at 35,000 feet is still injustice." She stepped away, and the world caught fire.